a perfect marriage, a hidden mistress, and a luxury penthouse paid for with betrayal. Isabella could have collapsed. But instead she became smarter, colder and braver than the man who underestimated her. This story teaches courage, self-worth, and a mother's strength. Give us one like and one share to support the next story. Thanks for watching.
Betrayal carries a sharp, metallic tang, something far more stifling than any expensive perfume. Isabella was 7 months pregnant, her heart filled with visions of a shared future, when she stumbled upon a nightmare instead. Her husband, Adrian, the very man who had once sworn eternal devotion, had secretly purchased a luxury penthouse. It was not intended for their growing family. It was a curated love nest for his mistress, hidden away in plain sight. Adrian had no inkling of the storm gathering on the horizon. He was entirely oblivious to the cold, calculating fury of a scorned woman, particularly a mother who was ready to fight for her child's survival. This was not merely a story about infidelity. It was a masterclass in calculated revenge. We are looking at a multi-million-dollar property heist and a woman who was perfectly prepared to systematically dismantle his life, one forged document at a time. The city skyline glittered with the cold, hard promise of ambition. However, Isabella Rossi found no comfort in the view. Instead, her focus was fixed on a pair of tiny, pale yellow knitted booties. They were incredibly soft, delicate as a whisper, and served as a heartbreaking reminder of the life developing inside her. At 32, by every outward appearance, Isabella seemed to possess a perfect life, blessed with everything she could ever want. She was the wife of Adrian Thorne, a high-profile developer who possessed an uncanny ability to turn New York real estate into pure gold. They resided in a massive, sprawling duplex that offered a breathtaking view of Central Park. Their existence was a blur of charity galas, exclusive dinners, and industry events. Adrian was the indisputable golden boy of the Thorne empire, widely recognized for his razor-sharp suits and his ruthless, uncompromising business deals. Isabella worked as a refined art curator, acting as the calm, elegant soul to his chaotic, high-pressure whirlwind. They first met at a Sotheby's auction while he was aggressively bidding on a piece of modern art. Their romance felt instantaneous, a whirlwind affair that captured the public imagination and landed them a prominent, glowing feature spread in the pages of Vogue magazine. For 5 years, their marriage felt like a rare, polished masterpiece. Then, the pregnancy occurred. Adrian appeared genuinely overjoyed, or at the very least, he performed the role to absolute perfection. He hired the most reputable doctors, showered her with constant, public affection, and meticulously designed a nursery with panoramic views, promising their unborn child the world. "Only the best for my heir," he would often joke, gently kissing the top of her head. The scent of his expensive Tom Ford cologne still clouded her better judgment, masking the rot underneath. Yet, lately, something was fundamentally off. The harmony was fraying. Adrian was working late with increasing frequency, spinning elaborate, exhausting excuses. He sounded perpetually stressed, claiming that a major business deal in Singapore was hitting a snag. Sometimes he would offer a different excuse. "Dinner with investors, darling. Do not wait up for me," he would say. Fresh lilies arrived every Monday, but the handwritten notes felt cold and strangely hollow. Conversations over breakfast vanished, replaced entirely by the rhythmic rustle of his newspaper and short, clipped replies. Isabella, blaming her pregnancy hormones, desperately tried to convince herself that it was nothing more than irrational anxiety. Her high society friends constantly reminded her how incredibly lucky she was. "Adrian adores you, Izzy, and you have a baby on the way," they insisted. "You truly have it all." Despite their words, a cold, heavy knot of dread continued to tighten in her gut. The unraveling began the day she accidentally answered his phone. Adrian had carelessly left it on the nightstand, a rare, sloppy mistake that would ultimately prove to be his downfall. The caller ID flashed the name KZ Interiors. Feeling a surge of curiosity, since they had no open projects, she answered the device. A bright, slightly too familiar female voice chirped into the receiver. "Mr. Thorne, just confirming that the fabric swatches for the Hudson Yards penthouse have arrived." Chloe is absolutely thrilled with the velvet. The woman stated with unearned confidence. Isabella S. Blood turned to liquid ice. Hudson Yards. Chloe. She mumbled something incoherent about a wrong number and quickly hung up, her heart hammering violently against her ribs. Adrian did not own a penthouse at Hudson Yards, or so she had always believed. When she casually questioned him about it later, feigning a light interest, Adrian was immediately dismissive. Hudson Yards. No, darling. We are focused entirely on overseas markets right now. You must have misheard, he replied. He flashed a smile that was far too fast and too practiced, immediately pivoting the conversation to discuss the upcoming baby shower. The seed of doubt had been firmly planted, and it was already wrapping its dark, suffocating roots around her peace of mind. She began noticing all the small, jagged details, the faint, floral scent of jasmine lingering on his shirts, a scent that was distinctly not her perfume. The way he would tilt his phone away whenever text messages popped up on the screen. The boys' nights that inexplicably dragged into the early hours of the morning. One Tuesday, while searching for a book, she stumbled upon a private American Express statement. This was not their shared joint account. This was a secret, hidden stash. Her hands trembled as she scanned the list of charges. There were transactions from high-end boutiques, extravagant dinners at Daniel, a 2-Michelin star establishment they had not visited together in over a year. Then she saw it. A massive down payment totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars sent to the developers of a luxury building at Hudson Yards. It was specifically for Penthouse B35. The baby booties resting in her lap suddenly felt heavy, as if they were made of solid lead. The nursery Adrian was meticulously designing for their child felt less like a room and more like a golden, gilded cage. The life she had convinced herself was perfect was an intricate, elaborate lie, and she was standing precariously on the edge of the collapse. Her husband was not merely distant. He was living a complete double life, and he was doing it using her own money. The prize of his grand deception was a multi-million-dollar love nest for himself and this mysterious woman, Chloe. The initial shock did not break her. Instead, it served to wake her up. The gentle, soft-spoken art curator vanished completely. In her place, a new woman emerged, with eyes as cold, hard, and sharp as the diamonds Adrian was likely buying for his mistress. Her baby deserved far more than a broken home and a father whose attention was divided elsewhere. Her baby deserved absolute security. Isabella resolved that she would ensure they got exactly that. The game had only just begun, and Adrian Thorne had absolutely no idea who he was playing against. The credit card statement felt like a venomous, living snake held tightly in her grip. The cold, corporate lettering on the page contrasted sharply with the violent storm raging inside her. Hudson Yards, Penthouse B, Chloe. The name swirled in her mind like a toxic, deadly cocktail for days. Isabella moved through her daily life like a seasoned actor performing on a stage. She wore a perfect, practiced smile, but internally, a massive, silent tempest was brewing. She attended prenatal yoga classes and picked out nursery colors. With the interior designer, Adrian had hired a pathetic attempt to distract her. She realized with bitter clarity. She continued to play the role of the serene, expectant mother. But beneath that facade, Isabella was hardening. Her initial grief was rapidly turning into cold, unyielding steel. She did not just want suspicion. She demanded concrete proof. Utilizing the sharp, meticulous research skills she had mastered as an art curator, she went to work. She started with KZ Interiors. A quick, targeted search revealed it was a boutique design firm, frequently featured in the pages of top architectural magazines. Their online portfolio displayed several high-end projects, including to her absolute horror collaborations at Hudson Yards. Chloe was not just a name. She was either the principal designer, Katerina Zelaleski, or perhaps someone far more significant in his personal life. Isabella turned her entire focus toward Adrian's laptop. She already knew his password, their wedding anniversary date, a cruel, ironic joke that made her stomach turn. One night, while Adrian was supposedly out at a fake dinner meeting, she slipped quietly into his study. The room, which used to be his peaceful sanctuary, now smelled faintly of his cologne. It made her skin crawl to be there. Her fingers flew rapidly across the keys. She searched for Hudson Yards, Penthouse B. Chloe and KZ Interiors. The ugly truth spilled out. Emails to bankers, large fund transfers, and invoices addressed to Mr. A. Thorne for Penthouse B35. Then she opened an email from Katerina Zelaleski titled Mood Board and Initial Concept. She clicked on an attachment, and her breath hitched in her throat. These were not just architectural plans. There were high-resolution photos of a strikingly beautiful woman with long dark hair and a predatory, confident smile. She was posing provocatively in the nearly finished penthouse, standing by floor-to-ceiling windows with expansive river views, lounging in a master bedroom that oozed excessive luxury. This was Chloe, and she was clearly treating the place like it was her home. One specific photo twisted the knife even deeper. Chloe was wearing a silk robe that Isabella recognized instantly it belonged to her. Chloe was laughing, champagne in hand, with his arm wrapped securely around her waist. His face was not visible, but the iconic Patek Philippe watch on his wrist gave him away. It was the very same piece Isabella had gifted him for their 3rd anniversary. The study felt like a tomb. Isabella shut the laptop. A wave of cold, calculated rage washing away the initial shock. This was not just some brief, meaningless fling. It was a fully realized secret life, constructed on layers of lies and paid for with her own money. That penthouse was far more than just a piece of high-end real estate. It was a grand, expensive monument to his betrayal. To twist the knife, he had purchased art from galleries that Isabella personally supported, using her own passions and tastes to decorate his love nest. By the very next morning, she knew she had to see it for herself. She needed to stand in that space to fully believe it. Pretending to visit a friend in the area, she took a taxi to that polished, glass-covered neighborhood on the west side. 35 Hudson Yards loomed high above her, a sleek, intimidating beacon of wealth reflecting the gray, overcast sky. Her palms were sweating as she finally reached the concierge desk. She lied, claiming she had a gift for a Chloe Miller in Penthouse B, hoping the generic name would somehow pass. The concierge, dressed in an immaculate uniform, gave her a polite but firm, unwavering smile. "We have no Chloe Miller registered in Unit B," he said. "That place is officially listed under Thorne." Thorne. He did not even bother to attempt to hide it behind an anonymous shell company. The sheer, overwhelming arrogance of it hit her like a physical blow, leaving her shaking with a cold, hard and unrelenting fury. Isabella faked a look of confusion, her hand resting protectively on her belly. "Maybe it is registered under Adrian Thorne," she offered, playing the part of the confused associate. "I just need to drop these items off for Chloe." The concierge, likely moved by her obvious pregnancy and the mention of the wealthy Thorne name, softened his professional stance. "I cannot let you up, ma'am, but I can call Ms. Chloe to see if she is currently home." Isabella panicked. She was not ready to face the woman yet. "You know what? I have her direct number. I will coordinate everything myself. Sorry for the trouble," she said, turning away. She walked away, maintaining her composure until she reached the safety of a taxi. Then the tears finally came. He owned it. He was flaunting it. Chloe was living like a queen in a castle built from the ashes of her marriage. The cruel, undeniable reality was laid bare in his own emails. He had even ordered the specific Bang & Olufsen sound system they had previously discussed for their own country retreat. He had forwarded an email to his decorator, bragging to Katerina Zelaleski about the massive, exclusive discount he had secured by purchasing the units in bulk. The files contained his home and that shrine to his infidelity. That evening, as Adrian whistled a cheerful tune, Isabella watched him with fresh, unforgiving eyes. Every smile and every touch felt like a cold, calculated act of theater designed to keep her in the dark. He asked about her doctor, faking worry, and rubbed her ankles with a practiced, performative affection that made her skin crawl. "You seem quiet, Izzy," he murmured, his voice heavy with that familiar, hollow concern. "Is the baby okay?" She looked at the man she used to love, a man who was now nothing more than a carefully crafted mask. The irony of his question stung. He was the one poisoning their world. Yet he sat there acting like the concerned provider. She had to stay silent, just observe. She touched her belly, feeling the rhythmic, grounding kick from within. "Yes, Adrian," she said, her voice steady and betraying nothing. "The baby is strong, very strong." And in that moment she realized she was just as resilient. The sudden, gut-wrenching discovery of the Hudson Yards penthouse hadn't broken her as he had expected. Instead, it had shattered the final illusion she held about their marriage, leaving her with a clarity she had never felt before in her life. A sharp glacial calm took hold, turning her inner panic into a weapon. The pain was deep, a constant throb, but it served as fuel for a cold, calculated fury that sharpened her mind. This was no longer just about salvaging a dying marriage or seeking closure. This was about survival for her and her unborn child in a world that would happily discard them both. Adrian had made a fatal error. He had severely underestimated the woman standing right in front of him. He saw only a beautiful, art-loving wife, a pretty accessory for his high-profile life. He completely forgot the brilliant, detail-oriented curator that lived underneath that surface. For a full week, Isabella played a perfect, terrifying double game. By day, she was the happy, glowing, pregnant wife at her own baby shower, a truly grotesque joke quietly enduring his sickening displays of affection, while hiding the fact that she was already 2 steps ahead of him. He was laying it on thick, sensing some sort of shift in the air, or perhaps just easing his own mounting guilt. But at night, when he slept soundly beside her, a proximity that made every nerve in her body crawl, Isabella was wide awake, staring into the dark, meticulously planning his downfall. She memorized his breathing, his movements, and his patterns, gathering every shred of ammunition she would need to dismantle the life he thought was so secure. She knew she needed a shark, not one of those soft, standard family lawyers who dealt in pleasantries. Through an old, trusted friend from her gallery days, she was introduced to Victoria Chen, a notorious, ruthless Manhattan divorce attorney known for taking down the city's most powerful, arrogant men. Victoria didn't care about feelings. She cared about winning, and Isabella was more than ready to provide the leverage necessary to bring her husband to his knees. Victoria was legendary for her ability to destroy powerful men in the courtroom, leaving them with nothing but their pride. They met in a plain, nondescript midtown office to avoid prying eyes. Isabella, looking calm and perfectly elegant despite the war raging inside her, laid out the evidence, the bank statements she had painstakingly copied, the digital footprints, the emails, and the photos that proved he had been lying to her for years. She even mentioned the speaker system, that small, pathetic piece of his calculated cruelty that had first tipped her off. Victoria, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, listened intently as the story unfolded. When Isabella finally finished, there was a long, heavy silence. Victoria leaned back in her leather chair, steepled her fingers, and looked at her. "Mrs. Thorne," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of any wasted emotion, "your husband is not just a common cheater. He is arrogant, which is his biggest weakness. If the penthouse is in his name, it definitely complicates the legal process." "So what are my options exactly?" Isabella asked, her voice steady as stone. "I do not just want a standard divorce. I need more than that. I need to make sure he cannot hurt us again. And I need the resources to ensure my child has a future he cannot touch or manipulate for his own gain. I need to protect my child, and I know he used our money to build this secret life." The word "our" felt like poison on her tongue. Victoria nodded slowly, acknowledging the gravity of the situation. "We could file for divorce, cite adultery, and fight for your fair share of every single asset he owns. It will be a battle. But the evidence you have collected is incredibly damning. We will hit him where he is most vulnerable, his bank account and his reputation. Given your current pregnancy, we could aim for a massive settlement that secures your lifestyle for years to come." Victoria paused, her eyes glinting with a predator's focus. "You found the original bank statement, which is impressive. Do you have regular access to his private financial records?" "Yes," Isabella confirmed, her resolve firming. "He has become lazy and complacent, never imagining that his own wife would dare to look behind the curtain he had so carefully drawn. He has become lazy, she repeated, reflecting on his hubris. He does not think I ever look. Or perhaps he simply does not care. And the penthouse? Victoria asked. Is there a mortgage attached to it? Isabella remembered the documents vividly, a huge, suspicious down payment. But he had funded the rest through a private, quiet loan from Sterling Fiduciary Trust, a move he clearly thought was untraceable. Victoria tapped her desk rhythmically. If the property is in his name, or even a single-member company, things change. And if he used a power of attorney you could access, or if he was foolish enough to leave signed, blank transfer papers lying around, she trailed off, letting the potential for a massive loophole hang in the air. Isabella remembered how Adrian worked. He was a creature of absolute habit, never deviating from his structured, predictable routine. She let the thought hang, watching Isabella process the implication. Isabella remembered exactly how Adrian worked, day in and day out. He was a creature of habit who hated change. He often had complex legal papers sent home for his signature, carelessly leaving them on his desk overnight when he was distracted by his phone or his own inflated sense of importance. It was his laziness that would eventually become his undoing. He trusted their housekeeper, and he thought of her as just his naive, pregnant wife who stayed out of his business. He often has his assistant, Martin, prepare documents, Isabella said, a daring plan starting to form in her mind. Martin is loyal, but also completely overwhelmed by the volume of work Adrian demands. He is prone to mistakes because he is rushing to keep up with his boss's relentless and ever-changing schedule. Adrian signs everything in stacks, rarely glancing at them, especially if Martin tells him it is standard company procedure. A small cold smile touched Victoria's lips, and she leaned forward. Interesting. Now, transferring a deed without his direct knowledge is illegal and incredibly dangerous. If we get this wrong, it could blow back on you. Forgery is a serious crime. Mrs. Thorne, we need a different, much cleaner path. Forgery is a crime. Mrs. Thorne, we need a different path. One that keeps you completely safe while we take what is yours. Isabella felt her hopes sink for a second before Victoria leaned in closer. It is all about his holdings. If he has a company for that penthouse, and if you are secretly a member, or if he added you to the title during a moment of, let us say, weakness or vanity, it changes the game entirely. Let us call it misguided love, or simple tax planning. He could have made you a joint owner or a trust beneficiary without even thinking twice about it. That changes everything. Victoria then laid out a bold, complex plan designed to exploit his ego. It was not about stealing, but about rearranging his own financial structures so that he unknowingly handed the keys to his empire over to the very person he thought he had successfully silenced. It was not about faking a signature. It was about using Adrian's arrogance and his own messy, overly complicated financial web against him. It required perfect timing, deep, obsessive research, and a level of grit Isabella never knew she had hidden within herself. She was ready to play the long game, waiting for the exact moment when his guard would be down, ensuring that when the trap finally snapped shut, he wouldn't even know what had hit him. Information is step one, Victoria explained with a serious tone. I need everything on that penthouse. Is it strictly in his name? What about his specific signing habits? Does he use a specific notary? Are there digital locks or security measures in place? We must map his entire system from the inside out to ensure that when we execute this, it is flawless. There is no room for error when dealing with a man of his stature and his litigious nature. Over the next few weeks, Isabella became a professional spy in her own home. She watched Adrian closely, noting every quirk. His assistant, Martin, prepped folders for him daily. Adrian would mindlessly sign them while scrolling his phone or watching the news, clearly bored and distracted by his own self-importance. It was the perfect opportunity for Isabella to observe the flow of his business life without him ever suspecting her presence. She learned he used an elderly, somewhat careless notary named Arthur Pinter. Arthur was lazy and trusted Martin blindly, which was another critical vulnerability in Adrian's security. Victoria's plan was clear. Do not forge anything. Facilitate the process. Make Adrian sign the documents himself, voluntarily, without ever realizing that he was signing away his prized possession. It was a masterpiece of manipulation that Isabella felt capable of executing. They would create completely legitimate papers, an amendment to a trust or a standard asset transfer. It would include the penthouse, adding Isabella as the primary beneficiary. To him, it would just look like boring, routine asset protection, the kind of paperwork he dealt with all the time without bothering to read the fine print. The deception had to be perfect, hidden in plain sight, disguised as the very thing he ignored every single day. Isabella found the penthouse was under a new company, Hudson Luxury Properties. He was the sole member. Perfect. Victoria started drafting layered documents, designed to blend right into Adrian's massive stack of daily, mundane paperwork. The goal was to make it look so boring and standard that he would sign it without a second thought. It was the ultimate test of his arrogance. Betting on the fact that he was too full of himself to pay attention, the key paper would transfer the company into a new trust, with Isabella as the trustee and sole beneficiary. The trick, Victoria whispered during a private meeting, is the presentation. It has to look absolutely, incredibly standard. It cannot stand out in any way. It has to look like a document he has seen 1,000 times before. If he pauses, if he asks a single question, the whole plan falls apart. It has to be seamless. It needs to be buried within the pile. Make it look like boring internal restructuring that his eyes would just slide right over. Martin is the gatekeeper. If he puts it in the pile, Adrian will sign it. Isabella felt absolutely terrified, but her resolve was stronger than her fear. She knew this was the only way to secure a future for her and her child, and that knowledge gave her the strength to continue with the plan. "How do I reach Martin?" Isabella asked. Victoria smiled thinly. "Use your knowledge of the office. Martin is drowning in work. What if urgent?" Confusing papers suddenly landed on his desk from another department right when he is rushing to finish the stack. A little bit of controlled chaos is all we need to create the perfect distraction. If he is stressed and busy, he is much less likely to notice an extra page in a stack of 50. Isabella's mind raced as the pieces clicked together. Adrian always complained about the London office being slow and messy. She could definitely use that. It was the perfect excuse to introduce a bit of chaos into Martin's workflow, a distraction he wouldn't even think to question, because it fit perfectly into the existing frustrations he already had with the international team. It was simple, but it was highly effective. She knew Martin was desperate for a promotion. She had Victoria's legal genius. She knew all of Adrian's weaknesses, and she had the most powerful drive of all, the baby growing inside her. She would protect that life like a lioness protecting her cubs. There was no depth she wouldn't sink to, and no risk she wouldn't take, to ensure her child never had to suffer because of the man who was supposed to be their father. The trap was set. The penthouse, once his ultimate symbol of betrayal, was about to become her shield and her final victory. The plan was a dangerous, high-wire act filled with 1,000 ways to fail, but she was ready. She had spent weeks studying every angle, preparing for every possible outcome. Failure was simply not an option for her. She had come too far to turn back now, and she was ready for the end game. But to Isabella, the risk was nothing compared to the reality of being stuck with Adrian's lies. She had crossed the line the moment she saw Chloe's smug face in those photos. That cruel gift the speakers they once loved turned her pain into cold, hard steel. She wasn't just angry. She was focused. Every memory of his betrayal was now a building block in the wall she was constructing to trap him, and she felt nothing but cold satisfaction. This was not a heartbreak anymore. This was total war. Victoria had crafted the documents with the precision of a master legal surgeon. They were a symphony of legal filler, designed to bore and confuse anyone who looked too closely. The centerpiece was a deed of gift, moving the penthouse into a new trust for Isabella. It looked perfectly mundane, the kind of paper that people signed every day without a second thought, which made it perfectly dangerous. To anyone skimming the pages, it looked like dry, standard financial restructuring, the kind of thing the Thorne family did all the time to hide money or reduce tax liabilities. The whole plan relied on one weak spot, a single, tired, overworked human being. Martin was the key to everything. and she had spent enough time watching him to know exactly how to manipulate his environment to ensure he would fall right into the trap. Martin, the assistant. Isabella had studied him for weeks, noting his habits and his weaknesses. He was loyal and hard-working, but he was also completely underwater, desperate for a title change, and terrified of looking disorganized in front of Adrian. He was the perfect mark for a little bit of carefully staged chaos. Isabella knew exactly how to push his buttons to make him move quickly without thinking. He was perfect for a little chaos. Isabella started with a digital whisper. Using a burner phone, she sent an anonymous tip to a notorious gossip columnist who ran a blog for the Manhattan elite. The tip hinted at a massive, secret acquisition within the Thorne empire, something that would cause a stir. She knew it would create a headache for Adrian and put even more pressure on Martin to get everything perfect, making him more prone to mistakes. The column dropped 2 days later, sending a wave of panic and intense speculation through the halls of Thorne Industries. The executive suite was on edge, putting even more pressure on Martin to handle the fallout. Isabella watched from the sidelines as the office descended into the exact kind of frenzy she had hoped for. Everything was going according to plan, and she felt a surge of adrenaline as she realized her scheme was actually working. The entire executive suite was on edge, putting even more pressure on Martin. Then came the London distraction. Isabella knew Adrian was waiting for a massive, stalled project update from their London office, and she knew exactly how to make that delay work for her. She was ready to strike, waiting for the moment when Martin would be most vulnerable, and she knew that the London package was the perfect decoy for her own hidden documents. From a library computer, she sent an anonymous email to Martin, posing as a frustrated compliance officer. She warned that the London documents were finally coming, but they were a disaster and required urgent signing by Mr. Thorne to sell the lie. She attached a few confusing, harmless pages in a corrupted file, ensuring that Martin would be in a state of panic when the real, massive stack arrived. He would be too stressed to notice the discrepancy. To sell the lie, she attached a few confusing, harmless pages and a corrupted file to the email. As predicted, when the messy London package arrived on Thursday, Adrian's favorite day to sign, Martin was already panicking about the missing files and the deadline. This was exactly the window she needed. He was so focused on fixing the London disaster that he wasn't paying attention to the pile of documents he was preparing for Adrian's signature. This was her window. Earlier, she had visited a high-end print shop to perfectly replicate the corporate paper stock. Her hands shook, not with fear, but with an intense, focused excitement as she handed over the files Victoria had prepared. She had checked them 3 times, making sure everything was in order, and now it was just a matter of timing. She had to be precise, and she had to be calm. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She ensured the weight and the color of the ivory paper were an exact match for the official Thorne Industries stock. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a rhythmic beat of anticipation. Adrian had a 2-hour dental appointment that afternoon and was already in a foul mood, which was perfect. A grumpy Adrian was a rushed Adrian, and a rushed Adrian was exactly the man she needed him to be to sign those documents without reading them. She knew he would be impatient and just want to sign and leave. She also knew Martin often left the binder on the credenza in the outer office while he took phone calls or dealt with other tasks. Dressed in her maternity clothes, she walked onto the 48th floor with a purpose that felt almost electric. She looked like a wife visiting her husband, but she was really there to finish the job she had started weeks ago. She held a simple file, a decoy she had hidden from Adrian days ago. Aiming for Martin's desk, she walked over with a practiced, friendly smile, masking the storm inside her. "Martin, you look buried. Adrian mentioned he had a mountain of documents for you to sign today." "Mrs. Thorne," he said, clearly stressed. She knew this was the opening she had been waiting for. She was going to make this move look like a casual visit to the office. "Yeah, it is one of those days," he stammered, raking a hand through his hair. His eyes darted to the phones, which were ringing off the hook. "The docs are a disaster, and legal just dumped a new compliance stack on me. Poor thing, Isabella cooed, dripping with false sympathy. Don't let Adrian bully you too much when he returns from the dentist. She was playing the role perfectly, and he was completely buying into her facade of a supportive, unaware wife. He is always a bear after, she said, sliding her folder onto his cluttered desk as if it were nothing important. Her eyes swept the room. There it was, the thick signature binder on the credenza, left behind while Martin fumbled with his work. A shrill ring from his line demanded his attention, giving her the distraction she needed. She held her breath, waiting for the right second, her pulse thumping in her ears as the plan reached its climax. As Martin swiveled to take the call, Isabella made her move, with a magician's precision, hidden behind a large floral arrangement. She pulled the document for Victoria from her oversized handbag. It was a single clean sheet that would change everything, and she moved with a grace that surprised even her. Her hand was steady as she reached out, ready to slip the document into the binder, right where it needed to be for Adrian to see it first. In one breathless moment, she reached the credenza, opened the binder, and slipped her folder into the middle of the stack. It was done. She made her excuses and walked out, her legs feeling like jelly as she finally stepped into the elevator. The wait for the doors to slide shut was pure torture. That evening, Adrian came home exhausted and irritable, exactly as she had predicted he would. She knew his patterns, his flaws, and his arrogance better than he ever knew her. He complained about the dentist, poured himself a heavy double scotch, and slumped into his chair without a word of greeting. Isabella watched him from the sofa, feigning complete indifference while flipping through a fashion magazine. Finally, he reached for his briefcase and pulled out the binder. "God, everyone is trying to bury me today," he muttered, taking a long, jagged drink of his scotch. He had no idea how true his own words actually were in that moment. Isabella held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. He flipped through the pages, his expensive pen a blur as he scrawled his arrogant signature line after line. He barely looked at the papers, his mind clearly drifting elsewhere on Chloe, or perhaps on his next predatory business deal. Then, his hand moved to the documents Isabella had carefully placed for Victoria. He was signing his own fate without even pausing to read a single sentence. Her blood ran cold as he hesitated, frowning down at the title, Deed of Gift. Isabella braced herself, a sharp wave of nausea rising in her throat. "What in the world is this structure?" he mumbled. Squinting at the page with a confused look, he scanned the lines with tired eyes. Then, with a dismissive shrug, he seemed to reach a conclusion. The arrogance of the man was his greatest blind spot, and it was playing right into her hands tonight. Just more legal red tape from finance. Probably a tax dodge his father's lawyers cooked up, he muttered. He signed his name with a flourish. The mark was bold, decisive, and utterly clueless. He signed the trust. He signed the transfer. In less than 3 seconds, he unknowingly signed away his multi-million-dollar penthouse. It was finished. The deed was done, and the foundation of his luxury empire was now resting firmly in Isabella's hands. A dizzying, overwhelming wave of triumph hit Isabella. She excused herself, claiming she was exhausted, and retreated to the bedroom with shaking hands. The next morning, as Adrian left for his usual golf game, his thin, transparent cover for meeting Chloe Isabella wasted no time. She hurried to his study, grabbed the binder from the desk, and felt a rush of adrenaline as she retrieved the documents. Everything she had worked for was finally secured. She pulled out her paperwork and met a discreet courier Victoria had sent, and the papers were whisked away to be notarized by a trusted partner far from Adrian's reach. Within hours, they were filed with city and state authorities, making the transfer official. There was no going back now. She had walked a tightrope for months, and she had finally reached the other side. The legal machine was now moving, and nothing Adrian did could stop the inevitable outcome. The trail was now completely irreversible. The Hudson Yards penthouse was no longer his. It now belonged entirely to the Isabella Thorne Trust. The confrontation that occurred a week later was far more explosive than she had even imagined. Adrian had tried to access funds for the property, only to hit a massive, immovable bureaucratic wall. His world was beginning to collapse, and the look on his face when he realized It would be a memory she would cherish forever. He had ordered a frantic Martin to investigate, and the terrifying truth came out. Isabella was in the nursery, carefully hanging silver stars on a mobile, when he stormed into the room. He wasn't just mad, he was a terrifying spectacle of pure, unadulterated rage. His face was a mask of thunderous disbelief. He held a printout of the deed in his hand, his knuckles white as he gripped the paper. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. His hand shook violently as he shoved the paper toward her. "What the hell is this?" "Isabella!" he roared, his voice echoing through the duplex like a gunshot. "Hudson Luxury Properties transferred to some trust with your name on it. My penthouse." Isabella turned slowly, her face perfectly calm and composed. She didn't let him see the fear or the adrenaline. She just looked at him with the quiet confidence of someone who had already won the war. "Our penthouse, Adrian. I thought it was your very special, private project," she said softly. "The one with Chloe, the one with the sound system I always wanted." Adrian S. jaw hit the floor, his entire body stiffening in shock. His face turned a mottled, furious red that seemed to pulse with his anger. You knew," he stammered, unable to comprehend that his secret life had been transparent to her for months. The look of betrayal on his face was almost poetic. "I know everything, Adrian," Isabella said, her voice cutting through the room like a sharp, cold blade. "I know about Chloe, the dinners at Daniel on our account, the lingerie, the diamonds. I know about the lies, the late nights, and the pathetic, transparent excuses you gave me every single week." She watched him crumble. The facade of the powerful mogul was melting away, revealing the small, petty man underneath who had spent his time hurting her. "I know about the betrayal of your vows to me and our child. You conniving," he stepped toward her, his posture aggressive. "You forged my signature. This is fraud. I will have you arrested. I will ruin you." Isabella didn't flinch. "No, Adrian, you won't," she said firmly. "Because you didn't look closely at what you were signing, did you?" The power dynamic had shifted completely, and for the first time, he was the one looking up at her from a position of total weakness. "That was your signature, perfectly legal. You signed it away yourself." She pointed to the paper he clutched with such desperation. "As for ruining me, the tables have turned. That penthouse is now the asset securing my future and our child's. Go ahead. Challenge it in court if you think your pride can take the public exposure." She held her ground, knowing he had nowhere to turn. He was trapped by his own arrogance and his own legal signatures. Think of the scandal. Adrian Thorne, mogul, defrauded by his pregnant wife after his affair goes public. Or my favorite, Empire here loses penthouse in marital blunder. Your father will love that story in the papers. Adrian stood speechless, rage battling with the horrifying reality of her checkmate. He looked around the room, realizing that every single thing he thought he owned had been stripped away by the person he had dismissed as nothing more than a quiet, decorative wife. He had been completely outplayed and destroyed by the woman he had underestimated for years. Her phone buzzed gently, a text from Victoria. Digital registries updated. "Congratulations, Trustee Thorne. Assets secured." Isabella allowed herself a small, cold, triumphant smile. She had done it. She had survived. She had protected her child, and she had ensured that the man who betrayed her would never hold power over her again. It was the greatest victory of her life. "It seems, Adrian," she said, turning her back to him to fix the stars on the mobile, "that you bought a penthouse for your mistress, but your pregnant wife just changed the locks. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a nursery to finish." She stood untouchable, holding all the power in the room. He was a guest in a home that no longer belonged to him, a relic of a life that he had destroyed with his own choices. He had nothing left to say. Adrian was not a man who was used to losing. He was a predator in the cutthroat world of New York real estate, a titan used to bending people and contracts to his will. The raw fact that Isabella, his supposedly decorative wife, had orchestrated such a precise, surgical move left him reeling in a deep, dark vortex of shock. He felt the ground shifting beneath his feet, and for the first time in his life, he was not the one in control of the situation. His first reaction was a primal roar, the only language he truly knew. "You won't get away with this." My lawyers will tear this trust apart. I will drag you through every court in this state," he bellowed, his face a contorted mask of purple rage. He was shouting into the wind, though. He was trying to bully a reality that couldn't be bullied. Isabella just stood there, watching him, feeling a strange sense of pity for how small he looked in his anger. He moved toward her, trying to use his size and intimidation to cow her, a tactic that had always worked in the past. But this woman wasn't the one he married. Isabella remained unnervingly calm, a serene island in his hurricane, which only made him angrier. "Your lawyers will find, Adrian," she stated coolly, not even blinking as he paced, "that the paperwork is flawless. Your signature is real. The filing is legitimate. There is no fraud, just your own negligence. They will also find you gifted the ownership to a trust for your wife and unborn child. How noble! Maybe you should have watched what you were signing instead of rushing off to, well, you know." He stopped in his tracks, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The reality of what she was saying was sinking in like a lead weight. He had signed the documents himself. He had handed her the weapon, and she had fired it with absolute precision and perfect timing. His threats soon slammed into the granite wall that was Victoria Chen when Adrian's high-powered legal team, sent by a furious Alistair Thorne, tried to contest the transfer. They found a fight they weren't prepared for. They walked into Victoria's office expecting to bully her into a quick reversal, but they were sorely mistaken. Victoria was a shark in her own right, and she had spent years preparing for this exact moment. She was not afraid of them. Instead, Victoria met them with a perfect, airtight defense. She didn't just counter their points, she dismantled them one by one. She highlighted Adrian's own signature, which their own forensic experts had to confirm as genuine. She pointed to the ironclad language of the trust and the transfer, leaving them with absolutely nothing to say. The team of lawyers, used to winning through sheer intimidation, found themselves completely silenced by the legal trap Isabella had set. With surgical precision, she hinted at the mountain of evidence she had accumulated, proof of his affair and his secret theft of marital assets, flight logs, credit card receipts for lavish gifts, and damning photos that would turn his life into a total media circus. She didn't need to shout. She just placed the facts on the table, and the Thorne lawyers knew they were beaten. They couldn't fight the truth without burning Adrian's reputation to the ground. The Thorne family lawyers, used to crushing people with their massive wealth, suddenly found themselves totally cornered. Victoria Chen laid it out cold. "Imagine," she said, "forcing my client, a woman heavily pregnant, to recount your husband's infidelity on public record." The lawyers looked at each other, realizing that there was no way to spin this story without making Adrian look like a villain, a cheater and a fool. They had no cards left to play. "Think of the headlines," she added, letting the silence sting. It would be catastrophic. The threat of a messy court battle, one that would drag the family name through the mud and expose Adrian's recklessness to his rivals, was the ultimate weapon. It forced the lawyers to report back to Alistair that this was a lost cause. They had to advise him to back down. And for a man like Alistair, that was the hardest advice he had ever received. Alistair Thorne, a man who worshipped control above all else, dragged Adrian into his office for a private session. He was fuming, his voice a low, dangerous growl that promised consequences. He wasn't mad about the affair that was just typical in his eyes, but about being outsmarted by a woman he had severely underestimated. He hated losing, and he hated the fact that his own son had handed Isabella the keys to the kingdom. "You didn't just get caught," Alistair seethed. "You signed the confession, wrapped it up, and handed your enemy the gun. You made this family look pathetic, and that is unforgivable." Meanwhile, the mistress, Chloe, got a rude shock. A formal, legal eviction notice arrived at her door. It was the beginning of the end for her, and she had no idea that the luxury life she had been enjoying was about to be snatched away by the woman she mocked. Chloe, who saw herself as the next Mrs. Thorne or queen of his Hudson Yards penthouse, was furious. She bombarded Adrian with frantic, hysterical texts. "What is going on? Adrian. Some lawyer just sent me an eviction notice for my apartment." The panic in her messages was palpable. She had spent all her money on designer labels, assuming Adrian would always provide. Now she was staring at the barrel of a legal gun and realizing she was truly alone. "Your wife is losing her mind. Fix this now." Adrian, humiliated and desperate, tried to soothe her with empty promises, but his power was completely gone. He didn't hold the keys to that kingdom anymore. Chloe's luxury dream turned into a nightmare of packing boxes and cold reality. She was realizing far too late that she was just a temporary distraction to Adrian. And now that the penthouse was gone, he didn't care about her at all. The designer clothes, the furnishings, the illusion of a secure life, it all crumbled. She had tied her fate to a sinking ship. When it became clear Adrian couldn't, or more accurately, was forbidden by his father to buy her another place, things got ugly. The relationship that was built on theft and lies started to turn on itself. They began fighting, blaming each other for the disaster that Isabella had engineered so perfectly. It was a beautiful collapse. Chloe's true colors finally came out. Her tears turned into bitter threats to sell her sordid story to the press. That only made Adrian's position significantly worse. The battle over that penthouse became the biggest hurdle in the entire divorce settlement. Every day that passed was another day of humiliation for Adrian. He was being squeezed from all sides, and he was realizing that he had absolutely no way to escape the consequences of his own arrogance. Adrian, under immense pressure from his father to hide the scandal, faced Victoria Chen's resolve and finally gave in. The last meeting was pure defeat for him. In exchange for Isabella's quiet divorce and a strict confidentiality deal, the penthouse remained hers. He had to sign away his rights to the property to avoid the public shame of a courtroom drama. He left that meeting a broken man, stripped of the assets he had built his entire identity around. On top of that, a massive child support agreement was signed, and a huge chunk of their shared assets were handed over to Isabella, free and clear. Adrian was left fuming, his reputation ruined, his bank account drained, and his ego absolutely shattered. He had started this game believing he was the hunter, but he ended it as the prey. He had lost everything that mattered to his social standing, and he had no one to blame but his own greed. The Thorne Empire trembled. Whispers stalked Adrian through every boardroom as his golden touch finally failed. Alistair, ever the shark, quietly sidelined his own son in a cold corporate coup that crowned Adrian's steady younger sister as the true heir. Adrian was cast out, left with nothing but his shame and the memory of his mistake. The penthouse was gone, his company was gone, and his father didn't want anything to do with him anymore. For Isabella, those months were a time of quiet, powerful growth. The pressure was suffocating, but she found a new, steel-like resolve. She walked away from that Central Park duplex, leaving the haunting ghosts of her marriage behind for good. She didn't look back at the life she had once thought was her forever. She was moving toward a future she had built on her own terms, one where she would never be silenced or used by someone like Adrian again. She refused to live in the Hudson Yards penthouse herself. It was just a trophy of war, permanently tainted by his betrayal. With help from Victoria, she leased it to a high-end hedge fund manager, funneling the rent straight into her child's trust. The building that was meant to be the symbol of Adrian's power was now just a revenue stream for the daughter he never cared to support. It was a perfect, silent, and permanent justice. With her settlement, she bought a sun-drenched brownstone in a quiet, peaceful pocket of Brooklyn. It was a real home, a sanctuary she had truly earned. She poured her energy into her health, her growing baby, and reclaiming the woman she used to be before she lost herself in his world. She was happy, she was safe, and she was finally absolutely free. The war was over, and Isabella Thorne had come out on the other side as the winner. The art curator had not truly vanished from the scene. She had simply evolved, merging her refined aesthetic eye with the cold, ruthless strategist she was forced to become during her darkest hours. Now, she began consulting for high-end private galleries entirely on her own terms, quickly building a formidable reputation for her razor-sharp intellect and quiet, unassuming brilliance. People whispered about her ability to spot a masterpiece before anyone else, never realizing that the woman behind the curtain was a survivor who had weathered a storm that would have broken a lesser person. It was just weeks before her due date when an unremarkable, anonymous package arrived at her brownstone. Inside the box, nestled carefully on layers of soft, white tissue, sat a single, perfect yellow knitted baby booty. My heart skipped a beat when I saw it. It was the exact, undeniable twin to the one she had clutched in her trembling hand, back when her entire world had crumbled to pieces. The sight of it brought back a flood of memories, both painful and strangely healing, serving as a silent, tangible link to a past she was finally putting behind her. There was no note included, but Isabella knew in her gut that it had to be Martin Poole. It was a silent, almost ghost-like gesture of respect for the quiet victory she had claimed. She knew she would never be entirely sure, but it felt like a final, clean break from the chaos. When her daughter, Olivia Grace, was finally born, Isabella felt a love so profound it eclipsed every shadow that had haunted her. It was a clean slate, a brand new chapter where she was no longer the victim of someone else's games, but the architect of her own joyful existence. Holding little Olivia in the quiet of her Brooklyn home, she knew every single moment of terror had been worth it. She remembered the day Adrian made his awkward, hesitant visit to the hospital. The meeting itself was impeccably civil, almost professional, but the heavy, suffocating weight of everything they had shattered together sat thick in the air between them. It was a surreal moment, standing there as a mother, realizing that the man she once knew was now nothing more than a stranger who had been part of a life she no longer lived. He looked smaller than she remembered, his old hollow arrogance replaced by a sense of total, crushing defeat. He was a father, yes, but he was never going to be her partner again. He was just a man who had fumbled everything worth holding on to. Isabella Rossi Thorne did not just survive, she won. She emerged from the ashes of her marriage stronger, tempered by fire and fully in control of her own destiny. She walked with a new kind of confidence, the kind that only comes when you stop seeking approval and start trusting your own iron will. That glittering, cold penthouse still looms high over the Manhattan skyline, but it no longer serves as a monument to his endless, calculated lies. Today, it stands as a testament to a wife's quiet courage and her absolute refusal to remain a victim in her own life. She rewrote her story from the ground up, and looking at the life she has built, for herself and her daughter, it is clear that her best days are finally here. She moved past the resentment, finding peace in the knowledge that she did not just endure, but thrived. Her rebirth was absolute. Forged in the brutal fires of a billionaire-esque betrayal, she was gloriously, finally free from the gilded cage she once called home. Isabella turned the tables, transforming her greatest symbol of pain into a fortress of security for her future. This was not just a story of loss. It was a brutal, honest tale of revenge, high-stakes strategy, and a mother's sheer, unbreakable strength. She reclaimed her life, proving that no matter how much someone tries to erase you, your spirit can always find a way to rise again. So, what do you really think of Isabella's incredibly bold move? Could you have stood your ground with that kind of grace and precision? I would love to hear your thoughts. So let me know in the comments section below. If you truly loved this story of cold, calculated justice and a hard-earned comeback, go ahead and smash that like button and share it with someone who loves a good story of triumph. Your support really keeps this channel going, and I love reading your unique perspectives on these complicated, real-life situations. Most importantly, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more incredible tales of fortunes lost and reclaimed. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story when it drops. You honestly will not believe what happens in the next one, as we dive into another complex mystery of power, secrets, and the unexpected ways that people manage to change their lives forever. Thank you for spending your time with me today, and I cannot wait to see you back here very soon for another deep dive into the stories that truly matter.